So, as some of you may have heard, Korea is banning dog meat. Great. I'm relieved, and I bet so are you too. I'm sure many of you love dogs and are disgusted by the idea of eating dog meat.
I'm eating dog leg. I have definitely reached a new low.
But how many of you would be relieved if your government banned, for example, the production and the sale of chicken meat? Or outlawed pig farms? I bet many of you would be outraged and would consider it an infringement on your civil rights if the government took such action. I'm sure if vegans proposed such a thing as outlawing production of cow or chicken or pig meat, they would be accused of being dangerous extremists or fascists trying to control how other people live. But ultimately, what is the difference between dog meat and chicken meat or cow meat or pig meat? Especially on a plate. How many of you would even be able to taste the difference between dog or cow meat if it was served up to you in a meaty stew? Dogs, cows, chickens, pigs are all sentient creatures capable of experiencing suffering and pain. It seems to me that a lot of people are morally confused when it comes to their attitude towards animals, and this has been highlighted by the recent developments in South Korea. Many non-vegans I've seen have expressed a sense of disgust at the idea of consuming dogs, calling it barbaric. But for me, these reactions highlight a cultural bias rather than a morally coherent position. Let's pause here for a moment. Right now, we're killing globally something like 80 billion land animals a year and 1 trillion fish a year just for food. That exceeds the total number of human beings who have ever existed on Earth from the beginning of time. The amount of violence that we cause and for which we are responsible for morally is staggering. And there is no plausible claim that any of this violence is necessary. So why are we so worried about dogs when they represent just a tiny fraction of all that violence and suffering? Species should not determine the moral value of beings. Sentience should. What do I mean by sentience? By sentience, I mean the capacity to have subjective experiences and interests, and experience pleasure and suffering. Sentience confers moral status, not species. It's why we think it's wrong to kick a dog, but not a rock. A dog is clearly sentient, whilst a rock is not. So, if cows, chickens, pigs, and the like are sentient beings, just like cats and dogs, then there is a moral imperative to avoid inflicting unnecessary harm to all of these animals, not just the ones we like to keep as pets. The moral status of animals should not be dependent upon cultural perceptions or societal perceptions. Eating dogs and cats is no different, morally speaking, from consuming cows, pigs, or chickens. They are all sentient creatures who have interests such as avoiding pain and staying alive. The distinction between animals considered as pets and those raised for food is a cultural construct rather than a reflection of any inherent moral difference. For example, there is no meaningful difference in the respective capacities of a dog and a pig to experience suffering or pleasure. Here in the West, we often consider dogs and cats as cherished pets, while concurrently endorsing the consumption of other animals. But this is ultimately the manifestation of a cultural bias rather than a reflection of a more superior or nuanced moral stance. These cultural biases that lead to the revulsion at the idea of eating cows and cats, whilst accepting the consumption of other animals, reflects a form of speciesism, which is discrimination based on species. And we try and get round this speciesism with a whole array of psychological tricks. So when we think about how we think of pets compared to animals we regularly eat, we deploy these psychological mechanisms to compartmentalize our feelings and attitudes towards different species. For example, using different terms for animals designated as pets versus those raised for food, which creates mental compartments that allow us to separate feelings and attitudes towards animals. For example, the word pet itself evokes sentiments of companionship and affection, while terms like livestock or meat or beef or pork trigger more detached perspectives. Certain species are stripped of their individuality, their emotions and cognitive capacities, which allows people to distance themselves emotionally from the suffering of those animals, making it easier to justify their use for food. Whilst in contrast, we celebrate pets as individuals. We give them names, we buy them toys, we feed them their favourite foods, we bring them to vets, we mourn them when they die. We see pets as individual animals rather than viewing them merely as members of a species. This perspective often leads to a focus on the unique capacities of our pets, their experiences and their preference. But really, we should afford the same to all animals who are sentient, not just the ones we keep as pets. We empathise more with animals we perceive as companions or pets, and less with those we designate as food sources. For example, I've been accused of animal abuse for not feeding my dog meat. But what about the exploitation and violence against the animals that are killed to be eaten? Where does the empathy for those animals come in? They are, after all, equally capable of experiencing suffering and pleasure as a dog. If we are concerned about the well-being of animals and minimising suffering, it's inconsistent to be repulsed by consuming dogs and cats, whilst accepting the consumption of other animals who are equally able to feel pain. We're a society that abuses billions of animals for no good reason. We excuse ourselves by pretending that people who eat dogs are barbaric or abusers, and the rest of us are really humane or care about animals. We take the moral high ground over the people who eat animals like dogs, whilst we happily eat other animals who are equally capable of experiencing suffering. We do this repeatedly, yet we seemingly have no problem exploiting animals we like to eat, like pigs, cows, chicken and fish. The Korean dog meat ban presents an opportunity for us to examine our fundamental views about animal ethics. If we don't, this is just about fetishizing dogs or cats. So why do we think some animals matter and others don't? Please let me know your thoughts in the comment section below.